Before we get started fermenting our veggies, I wanted to give you a baseline knowledge of fermentation because I'm sure a lot of you are new to fermentation and it can definitely be overwhelming at first. It can be a little scary, especially for anyone new to the process. And I find when you do have that baseline knowledge, when you understand the process, when you understand some of the science, you're gonna have a lot more confidence when you go to actually ferment your food. So the question is, what is fermentation? Well, fermentation is pretty much just controlled decay. Just like human beings, food has a life, and because it's living, it's gonna die. It just happens to die a lot quicker than humans, so when we ferment our food, we get to preserve it. We get to make it last a lot longer than it would in its fresh form, sometimes months, even years when we ferment it. It also unlocks vitamins and nutrients in the food that aren't available in its fresh form that can be very healthy for us. It can unlock unique flavors as well, so that funkiness, that acidity, that is all from fermentation. So delicious flavors are always a bonus. And also it can create alcohol in certain forms of fermentation. So how does fermentation work? Well, there are millions of microbes in the environment. They're in you, they're in your food, and in fermentation, there are certain microbes like yeast, bacteria, and mold that feed off the carbs in certain foods like sugars and starches, and they convert those starches into acid, into gas, and into alcohol. So there's a few types of fermentation, 3 specifically. You have lactic acid fermentation, which you find in sauerkraut, in yogurt, in kimchi. You've seen me do that a lot on this channel. There's alcohol fermentation, which you find, of course, in wine and beer. And there's also acetic fermentation, which you find in vinegar and kombucha, which I make a ton of kombucha. So I take advantage of all of these different types of fermentation. Now, the key to fermentation is the environment. This is how we control the decay. We control the environment because there's good bacteria, there's bad bacteria, there's good microbes and bad microbes. So we're always trying to keep in the good microbes that are gonna ferment our food properly, that are gonna give us a healthy product, and we wanna keep away the bad stuff that's gonna create the mold and the decay that we don't want in our fermented foods. Now, specifically for our veggies, we're dealing with lactofermentation, and the byproduct of lactofermentation is lactic acid, which is why we have that tanginess from this fermentation process. Like when your yogurt tastes super tangy or pickles, that comes from lactic acid. And there are 2 key elements to create the perfect environment for lactofermentation. Number 1 is we want to cut off the oxygen. So aerobic, like aerobics class, means with air. You're using your breath, you're using oxygen to work out. We do not want an aerobic environment when it comes to lactofermentation. We want an anaerobic environment where there's no oxygen involved, because the oxygen is where those bad bacteria will come into play. But when there's no oxygen in the environment, we're promoting the good bacteria that we want. So you can see right here, when we are fermenting our veggies, if this is our water line of our bottle, you do not want any of the veggies poking through like here. Any veggies that are in contact with the oxygen above the water line are going to be susceptible to mold. So we have to make sure we keep them under the water where there's no oxygen available so we can have a proper fermentation. And I'll go over that process a little bit later. Now, the second key element in lactofermentation is the addition to salt. Not only does salt make our food taste delicious, but it also keeps away those bad bacteria that we do not want in our food. So by adding salt to our veggies and keeping them submerged in water, we're gonna create the perfect environment for the lactofermentation to take place. Now, there's a really simple equation that works great for fermenting veggies. All you have to do is find the weight of your vegetable that you're fermenting, plus the weight of the water that's going to be in the jar as well, and then you're going to multiply that by 2.5% or 0.0025, which would look something like this. This would be an example of how it would go. Say our veggies weigh 400 grams and our water weighs 200 grams, that's 600 grams for both the veggies and the water, times 0.025 gives us 15, which means we need 15 grams of salt added to the water for the perfect fermentation environment. Whew. You know what? Let me just show you how it works.
All right, I'm going to break this down for you really quickly. So we're gonna put our scale on and we're gonna zero it out with the jar on top. Now we're gonna pile in our veggies. Okay, so we are at 86 right here, but we're not done. We have to pour on our water. So pour that up to, not the top, because we're gonna weigh that down a little bit, right there. So that takes us to 339. So that is the weight of the water and the veggies. We're gonna go 339 times 0.025, which is 2.5%, 8.5 grams. Now what I do is I take this water and I pour that water out, keeping the veggies in there. Place that water back on there, zero it out again, and we're gonna add that 8.5 grams of salt. So we're just gonna keep adding. All right, 8 will do it. We're gonna put the lid on this, give this a shake to dissolve. And then now that our salt is dissolved, all we have to do is pour it on, and we have the perfect ratio of salt every time for our fermented veggies. A little complex at first, but I'm telling you, it's so simple once you master that equation.